And a very pleasant good evening to everyone. It is Monday night, September 10th, 2018. It's just after 8:30 p.m. on the East Coast.
And a very pleasant good
As
evening
you are
to
tuned
everyone.
in
It is
to the
Monday
Connoisseurs of
night,
Wrestling.
September 10th,
Got a
2018. It's
great
just
show
after
lined up
8:30
for you
p.m. on the East.
today. Talking about one of my favorite acts in all of wrestling history. It's going to be a great night. This is the lost episode of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. This was supposed to have taken place, oh goodness, maybe a month and a half ago, and yours truly wound up in the hospital, and we never could get this episode taped.
I think it was a month.
About a month, yeah. So we're finally doing it. You know, we haven't been around long enough to have a true lost episode, but we're going to call this the lost episode, and works out well considering the subject matter. So I'm looking forward to it tonight. I'm going to mark out like the fanboy that I am. And of course, when we're talking connoisseurs of wrestling, we got the full house, the very best crew in all of wrestling podcast fandom. Of course, the newest connoisseur, he is the one and the only one half of Two Guys One Sport, airing on Thursday night. Our friend George Atsavis. George,
Biff,
how you doing, buddy?
You're everything a guy could ask for in a hype boy. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. I'm pleasure to be here. I'm eager to pick your brain. This is an act I know a little bit about, but I'm good. I'm excited to talk about them.
You're giving me the vapors, sir. You're giving me the vapors. And while LL laughs, I'm chucking.
That's one. That's one Vapors reference.
I'm chucking it over to the godfather of podcasting. Of course, he is the OG. He is the one and the only TakersMinion, my good buddy. It's sumo time, my friend. I know you're excited. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I'm hoping I can stay awake to make it. I might not make it tonight, but I'm going to give it my best.
You damn well better. I'm not watching sumo alone. That's just
I
weird.
have had only about 4 hours sleep in the last 24 hours.
4 hours of sleep. You'll get enough sleep when you're dead. It's sumo day, buddy.
So I'm doing okay though. Other than that, how are you, good sir? Other than having vapors.
Oh yeah. Well, waiting on this hurricane to make up its mind what it's going to do.
I know. We're all worried about you, but you'll be fine.
It seems like I am always in harm's way. If my life was a movie, I am the damsel in distress. That is, I'm either in the hospital sick and dying, or a hurricane's trying to wipe me out, or a tornado is coming through my neighborhood. It's ever since I started this damn show. The universe is just working against me.
Blame the show, of course. It's the show's fault. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not. Well, maybe it is the show's fault. Maybe I should have done a show on poodles or something.
Yeah, okay.
Nah.
Oh, quiche. I'm going to start a podcast on quiche.
I like a good quiche, but I like 80s Southern style tag team a lot more.
I knew I loved you for a reason.
So do I. Fortunately, it's the same thing.
Well, it's always better in the South. Don't y'all know that?
I'm not
Take your
going
word
there.
for it.
Womp, 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 womp. Okay. And before we forget, we got the curator of the Connoisseurs of Wrestling, the last member of the team, but certainly not least. She is our my good friend, Legends Lover. And I'm going to turn the show over to you tonight to give us our formal introduction of the subject matter, because as we're about to find out in about 45 seconds or so, I'm going to be marking out too hard to handle the responsible aspect. So, Legends Lover, the show is yours. Take it away, because I know that you have some background information on tonight's tag team of choice.
Yes, it's one of your favorites. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're going to be doing on a special tag team from the Mid-South, which is Biff's favorite area and where he's an expert at. This team's been around on and off for about 10 years. We're looking back into the 80s and early 90s. There says there's more than this many, but there's at least 3 members of this team that everybody would know. And nobody, and I mean nobody, could forget their manager. So we're looking at the history. We're looking at the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette.
Oh,
God.
goody, oh, goody, oh, goody, oh, goody, oh, goody. I'm like a fat kid in a candy store.
Mr. Kensington, the floor is yours.
Okay. So,
Take it away, Biff.
okay, so the hot air bag is about to blow, guys. Midnight Express and Jim Cornette. We're talking about the quintessential definition of tag team specialists. Now, Taker, I'm going to have you, because I know that you know this as well, and George and LL, you probably know it as well. We're talking about tag team wrestling in an era when tag teams were put together for a very specific purpose. If you look at the history of the business, tag teams historically have fit one of two molds. Significant tag teams. Either they were put together with the intention of creating a major single star who you spun out of the tag team, or you put guys together that couldn't really draw on their own, but as a unit, they could maybe make you some money. Okay? So tag teams in the 70s and especially the 1980s, which is kind of the golden age, tag teams were not low-card acts. They were not designed just to fill up time on TV like they are now. Tag teams were a serious business. I think it was Starrcade 85 and Starrcade 86 that was simulcast for both Atlanta and Greensboro. In one location, they had the scaffold match and the World Heavyweight title match in Starrcade 86, but in the other location, they main evented the show with a tag team title match. And not a single person was upset because they love tag team wrestling that much.
And if I may, real quick, Biff, you know and I know that when the WWF was touring in the 80s, they had not one, not two, but 3 separate house show tours.
Oh, yeah.
And one of those would be the World Heavyweight Champion, and that would do the A cities. New York, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, Dallas. And one would be the tag team, and they would do the B cities. And your tag team champion was expected to draw in Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Kansas City, Indianapolis, St. Louis. And it was no small feat to have a tag team champion who would be a draw in the 80s, regardless of promotion. I mean, it was absolutely essential.
Exactly.
That's how important tag team wrestling was throughout the world.
To piggyback on that very point, the very first show that I ever went to, it was a WWF show. It was the first time they ever came to Charlotte, North Carolina. And to show you how rinky-dink WWF was in the Charlotte market, they got stuck in the old Coliseum.
The old
Whereas
Greensboro?
WCW and the NWA got the new Coliseum in Charlotte.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was 2 arenas. The new one, the one that's still there is the original, and then they tore down the new one about 10 years ago. But WWF came to town. It was shortly after WrestleMania 6. And it was, no, I'm sorry. No, it was like April 4th, 1990. It was right after, it was one of the last house show matches that Andre the Giant ever participated in. It was a rematch of the Colossal Connection against Demolition for the tag titles. That was the main event. And Andre turned on Haku again during the match and helped Demolition win. So that was the last time Andre had ever come through Charlotte. Was my first house show. But it was main evented because Charlotte was considered a B/C town by the tag titles. So, yeah, to your point exactly. That was what tag team wrestling was all about in the 80s. It was creating a money-drawing act. And honestly, if you look at all of the big companies in the 1980s, once you get past their heavyweight champion and their top babyface, if the champion is a heel, their next big act is usually a tag team. If you look at the NWA, who was the big act behind Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes? Well, it's the Rock and Roll Express.
Or the Midnight Express. That was
the Midnight.
Or the Road Warriors, if it was earlier in the 80s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're looking at WWF, who came out and helped Hulk Hogan in 1986 when he was attacked by King Kong Bundy? It was the British Bulldogs, because they were the next big baby faces. The Bulldogs were arguably ahead of Tito Santana. They main evented the Chicago portion of WrestleMania 2. In the AWA, Kurt Hennig and Scott Hall were a huge tag team. Then you had the Midnight Rockers come in. They were a huge team feuding with Doug Summers and Buddy Rose. So I mean, it's tag teams in this era had to be exceptional. They weren't gimmicks and they weren't jokes like they are today.
No.
And if you look at the totality of tag team wrestling in the 1980s, you will not find a more polished team, a more interesting team, a better team than the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette. They were the absolute best, and they did it in two distinct styles. They were Southern wrestling, but they were also innovative of a tag team style that was almost ahead of its time and wouldn't really come into vogue for another 10 years until after they had broken up. So we got so much we can talk about. I'm going to let y'all jump in here because I need to take a breath and have myself a cigarette.
You're absolutely right, George, Biff, and George for that matter. The tag teams were a draw. I mean, and Biff, I'm surprised you forgot this. You talked about Kurt Hennig and Scott Hall, but there's a tag team you forgot to put on that list, and that's Stevens and Bockwinkel from the late 70s. They were tag team specialists for a lot of years, and they were the second biggest draw behind Vern in the old AWA. Or Vern thought he was a draw, but I don't know how much money he actually drew. But I know Stevens and Bockwinkel drew money because I always wanted to see them lose their titles to whoever they were wrestling against.
We can throw the Blonde Bombers in there too. Patterson and Stevens were an excellent tag team.
I was about to say, and if you go down, to Dallas for 3 years, that feud, that promotion was propped up by the Von Erichs versus the Freebirds in all of its
tag
glory.
team promotion. Yeah,
in all of its glory, absolutely. And it's, one of my favorite teams, the Fantastics, did a ton of time down in WCCW.
Yes, they did.
Yes,
there is so much tradition in the tag team, and I can understand why now, Biff, you're so high on the Revival.
I
listening to you talk about the Midnight Express and tag team wrestling in general is exactly what the Revival is doing now.
Have all three of y'all seen the 2 out of 3 falls match between the Revival and DIY from TakeOver Toronto?
Biff, it was #1 on my ballot to the Observer at the end of that year for Match of the Year.
Okay,
we should do that on this show. I should we should do a team ballot. At the end of the year, or at least for the big stuff, because I'm going to need some help filling it out in 3-4 months. So start keeping things in the back of your brain. But I'm saying it was that match was #1 in the world for me.
I remember you talking about it. And I'm like, what the hell is he talking about? So I go back and watch it. And I'm like, holy shit!
I was at my mom's house at the time, and I was watching it on the TV in the living room. And my sister, who is a casual wrestling fan, basically by osmosis of watching my dad and I watch wrestling as she was growing up, would sitting next to me playing on her phone, and after a while she looked up and she said, "This is good, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, this is real good. This is really good. You're gonna like this." And even she was getting into it because it's simple storytelling.
That kind of quality, okay, the quality of that match. That's what the Midnight Express used to do weekly. They were doing those matches on the house show loops here every freaking week for years on end. That's that kind of quality that the Revival and DIY pulled off, and Revival pulled it off with a ton of teams. They had a good match with Enzo and Cass. Enzo and Cass couldn't wrestle their way out of a freaking paper bag.
They had a
great match with them in London.
They had a tremendous program with American Alpha on both NXT television and the house show loops. Like they're pretty great. They
thought American Alpha and Revival was the greatest thing since sliced bread until the DIY series came along. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so that kind of quality that we get so sporadically in 2018, that used to be the norm for tag team wrestling, especially in the WWF and some of the Southern Territories. Not all of them, but some of them. And then the AWA had a lot of good tag teams in the 80s too during its final years. The Midnight Express were known in the business as being among the best. but it was a different team depending on what era you're talking. And this is something that it's kind of hard to espouse unless you grew up watching them or you've watched a lot of their work. Midnight Express of Mid-South, World Class, and early on in Crockett is different than the Midnight Express that you would see from about 1987 to 1990 in Crockett and then in WCW. And it's all about the second man of the team. And when I say second man of the team, that is no disrespect to Loverboy Dennis Condrey, and that is certainly no disrespect to Sweet Stan Lane. The man that made the Midnight Express work is beautiful Bobby Eaton. He is the anchor of the team, and everybody will tell you this. Jim Cornette will tell you, and if Jim Cornette says it about the Midnight Express, it's freaking gospel. If they didn't have Bobby Eaton, there was no tag team. Now, all three of the big core members of the Midnight Express had, tag team runs with other people. Stan Lane was with Steve Keirn and Memphis as the Fabulous Ones. Dennis Condrey and Phil Hickerson had a great tag team. That was probably one of the most well-known tag teams in Memphis and the Southern Territories in the late 70s. Bobby Eaton had a tag team. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. Oh, my Lord. Nick Goulas' son. I forget his name. Well, let's go with Nick Goulas' son. Him and Bobby Eaton formed a tag team. And
George, by the way.
George. Of course I would forget George.
It's all right. I won't take it personally.
Well, it's there's not many calls for referencing George Goulas here on the show. So, George, this is your one shot at fame here, partner. But Bobby Eaton and George Goulas had a tag team that was well known in the Tennessee area, not for the best of reasons, obviously, but it was still prominent. So you're talking about tag team wrestlers in an era when you could make a career and a successful career out of being tag team wrestlers. But Bobby Eaton is the best of the best. He was a high flyer in an age when high flying was almost unheard of. And if you look at Bobby Eaton and you've never seen a Midnight Express match, you would look at him and think, oh, this guy's not a high flyer. He probably never leaves his feet. But you're talking about someone that's doing rocket launchers off the top rope and the double goozle and the Vegamatic and all of these crazy double team maneuvers that tag teams like the Revival or the New Day would do today. They were innovators of a style of wrestling that was not being done anywhere else. And my God, you compare the match quality to Jim Cornette's ability to make people hate him. It was a recipe for magic. I mean, Jim Cornette was hated.
Just the sound of his voice.
He was a dickhole.
I don't know about you there, Biff, or George, for that matter. I do not know if the minute I would hear his voice, I would cringe.
Oh, it was heat personified.
He's a lot like Bobby Heenan.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hear him or you see his face and be like, oh, shit. And I remember watching the Superstation on Saturdays and Sundays, especially Sundays at 6:00. It was 3:05 p.m. West Coast time, because 6:05 Eastern, 3:05 on the West Coast, and I would be watching, and you would have it. No one could introduce him but Jim Cornette, and he'd have this long ass spiel, a beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan, the Midnight Express, and I'd be like, well, I wish they would just lose the belts already. I don't have to hear this guy talk anymore. He was one of those people you wanted to see get his ass kicked and have his jaw broke so he couldn't talk for a month.
It was, yeah. That was the beautiful thing about the Midnight Express, was they had the capacity to back up their trash talk in the ring. They weren't the classic chicken shit heel tag team that you might see with inferior workers. Like, you know the archetype I'm talking about. The teams that cheat to win, and they're obviously not as good as the baby faces and never have a chance. When the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette wrestled Dusty, Magnum TA, and Baby Doll in a steel cage in the Great American Bash in '86, and yes, I'm reciting that from memory because I'm that much of a freaking fan. You know, it wasn't considered a mismatch to have the Midnight Express in against Magnum and Dusty, the two biggest babyface single stars in the NWA.
And they held their own.
They held their own.
In terms of heat. Absolutely did.
Yeah, the only thing that screwed them was Jim Cornette was no match for Baby Doll. And that was actual reality. Baby Doll injured Jim Cornette twice.
Yeah.
He tagged the shit out of him in Raleigh at the Dorton Arena one time because she missed her cue. And she came in late. She was supposed to chase Jim Cornette, and she wound up like clocking him in the back of the head because she used to be a world-class discus thrower. And then in the Great American Bash in Charlotte in the steel cage, she apparently broke Jim Cornette's jaw and dislocated it, just knocked it sideways.
Jeez.
Again, well, a punch she was supposed to miss, no less. So, yeah, poor Baby Doll. She beat the snot out of Jim Cornette several different times. But oh my God, did those matches draw? I mean, you're talking about 20, 25,000 people selling out Memorial Stadium over in Charlotte during a point when Charlotte's entire city population was less than 100,000. So like 1/5 the total population of the freaking city comes out to watch.
That's like the stuff in Memphis where like 1/3 of the people would be watching television every week.
Yeah, it was a phenomenon, and the Midnight Express were a huge part of it.
Well, if you listen to Jim Cornette on his talks on the Ring of Honor, and when he inducted the Rock and Roll Express, they said the greatest tag team besides the Midnight Express was the Rock and Roll Express. They had some great feuds because they were a lot alike.
Okay, I have to ask y'all a question, and I'm gonna jump back into the old Biff mode here because this is a conversation that I think George and Taker and you are going to have some fun with.
All right, let's go.
We know, and I think you've already mentioned on air. I know you mentioned it off the air that George, you are a huge fan of the Fantastics.
I love me some Tommy Rogers.
Right, and Taker, if I'm not mistaken, you've had words about the Rock and Roll Express in the past, have you not?
Takers?
I shocked him so much that he was unable to respond.
You did it.
I have indirectly knocked Taker off the air. Oh, okay. Yeah, so, but no, the whole deal, it was depending on what territory you went to in the southern markets, because this is where these three teams were all based out of. You either liked the Midnight Express versus the Rock and Roll Express, or you liked the Midnight Express and the Fantastics. In Charlotte, the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express were king. In Mid-South, the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express were kind of the big feud. In Dallas, it was the Midnight Express and the Fantastics. So it varied. It depended on what territory you went to. The big money drawing tag team match, you know, it depended on the market, which team they preferred. So George,
but Biff, notice who was always the connecting tissue. It was always the Midnight Express.
Yeah, because that's the team that is packing them out, because you want to see the Midnight Express get their ass kicked.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they would do anything for heat. They would do anything for heat. Jim Cornette, this video is available on YouTube, actually, if you ever get a chance. It's Jim Cornette's promos that were too hot to air for TV that he got in trouble for. And he cut a promo on Ronnie Garvin. I don't know if you remember this. In '87, they ran an angle on, I think it was Worldwide Wrestling or maybe NWA Pro, where Jim Cornette threw a fireball and burned Ronnie Garvin's face. And it turned Jimmy Garvin babyface.
Okay.
For his run in '87 and '88. And what ended up happening the week after on World Championship Wrestling on TBS, Jim Cornette come out to cut a promo about it. And he was gloating. And this was in like '87. And he's like, Ronnie Garvin's face went up like the Challenger.
Oh, yeah. That,
Whoa. Oh, okay.
He said the lights in the studio all come down, and Dusty Rhodes comes out, and he's like, "Kid, don't talk about the Challenger. Do it again." So, I mean, but that was the kind. I mean, he could get apocalyptic heat. You know, there's nuclear heat, which is what Roman Reigns draws in smart heavy towns, and then there's apocalyptic heat, where the Midnight Express have to have police escort to get to the back of the arena. The famous Tulsa story that's been told by Jim Cornette, where there was a riot after a match and they were losing cops in the melee, and eventually Jim Cornette had to run and hide under this little scaffolding area, and Jim Ross was screaming at him to get away because Bill Watts had parked his Cadillac or his car there, and people were hitting it with beer bottles trying to hit Jim Cornette. So
yes, I heard that story.
There's dozens of those stories because that's how much heat they used to draw. They were just the quintessential asshole team you wanted to see get beat up, but they were so good they rarely did.
We're going to coin a new level of heat because we've all heard about X-Pac heat, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Well, now why don't we go with the next level of Jim Cornette heat?
I call it Old Testament prophet heat myself.
Yes,
that's a good one.
You've got your nuclear heat, your molten heat, your biblical heat. You've got your Old Testament prophet heat, where it's raining fire down from the sky and blowing people up, and then you've got your end of the world heat, where that was like Tommaso Ciampa in New Orleans, where he gets power bombed on the bare concrete and the crowd chanted, "You deserve it." That's some on point hatred. His entrance music was everybody saying "F you."
He's still, to this day, right now, still don't have any music.
I swear, I think I may have mentioned
that
this.
was one of the smartest moves, I think.
If Tommaso Ciampa had come around in 1984 Mid-South, he would need the Louisiana National Guard to get to the ring.
He would?
Oh, that dude is great. But yeah, Mid-South, Dallas.
Sorry, Sal. But, we speak the truth.
Yeah, we do. Tommaso is a throwback in every sense of the word.
I mean, he's taken a book out of Jim Cornette's. He's taken a page out of Jim Cornette's book on how to draw heat, and he's working it. I mean, you think about it. Everybody has a ring music. Going to the ring music. He had it, and then in New Orleans didn't. And that's one of those things. It's because I remember I was at work. I had it on, and I was doing something, and I'm just hearing the crowd go nuts, and I'm like, "What's going on?" There's nothing going on. And I go, "There's Tommaso Ciampa just walking to the ring, like, I'll get there when I get there." And he's waving to the crowd and all this stuff, and they're just laying into him, and I'm like, "Holy shit!" I like this because that's how it was when I was a kid. There was no music.
I was in the building live for that match. Yes, envy me, y'all. Tower before me in despair. The only crowd reaction more passionate that I've ever heard live than what I heard for the Tommaso Ciampa Johnny Gargano match was when Steve Austin won the WWF title in '99. After King of the Ring.
You were at WrestleMania and we didn't meet up? That sucks.
You went to WrestleMania this year?
Yeah.
Son of a bitch.
I know. We screwed up.
I know it.
What else did you see besides WrestleMania? I'm curious real quick.
I went to TakeOver the night before, and then I went to the Superdome for WrestleMania. So I saw those two shows. I got in... I left Charlotte on Thursday. We wound up stopping in Biloxi because I had to play blackjack at the casinos. And then we came in Friday afternoon, and I nearly married the landlady that had the house for us down there. She brought me beer, and I was going to go out Friday night, but I got drunk. So.
I landed Friday. Went from the airport to the WWN show, or I saw Riddle Ospreay, and it was great.
Oh, you bastard! I'm envious now.
It was very, very, very good. So was Sekimoto and Keith Lee and Zack Sabre, and it was a lot of fun. Went back to the Airbnb where my friends were staying, changed, went out, got hammered because it's New Orleans.
Yeah, exactly.
Woke up feeling like death because every drink has 14 pounds of sugar in it. So you wake up the next morning and you want to die. I'm sure you can relate, you know?
I broke the bed in my condo.
I slept for like 4 hours. I woke up and I was like, I am death, you know? I went to Ring of Honor actually because I'd never seen Omega live and I wanted to see Omega live. And then
yeah.
And it was a tough call. Tough call.
Oh, it was. It was. We struggled with that too.
And then it went to WrestleMania.
Yeah, we struggled on the Ring of Honor show too.
Biff and George, guess who else was at WrestleMania this year? Part of the family, so to speak, by osmosis, I guess.
Who?
LL's daughter and my stepdaughter was at WrestleMania this year as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
If I had known that, I would have organized like a big meetup Saturday morning or something.
That's too bad.
And get this, where is WrestleMania next year?
New York.
My stepdaughter lives on Long Island.
Oh, cool.
How old is
my
she?
podcast partner? My podcast partner lives in northern New Jersey. I may be going out there to see him and go to a few shows.
And if everything goes right, myself, Legends Lover, and possibly MDS will all be in New York.
That's awesome.
For doing stuff for the other podcast, Shooting the Breeze.
How old is your stepdaughter, Taker?
Huh?
How old is your stepdaughter?
I don't have a stepfather.
Stepdaughter.
Stepdaughter.
Yes.
Too young for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just curious if she ever
and I'm sure LL would agree with that.
If she wanted to come on the show.
She's 32.
What the hell do you mean too young for me? I'm 32.
Too young for you.
The hell she is.
Plus, she's got her 2 kids.
I love kids.
She already said she's going to WrestleMania next year.
TakersMinion and stepdaughter, if you're listening to this, call me.
Bring the kids.
Bring the kids. Oh Lord, we are okay. We've
lost the thread.
We left the solar system we were in.
We've lost the thread.
But that's
traveling in the interstellar space.
all right. That's all right. That's fine. I mean, this is stuff that came up, and that's part of it here.
Well, hey, the Midnight Express used to own New Orleans. That was one of the big Mid-South towns, and it's just fun to think, how, and of course, there was some of the famous matches in New Orleans for the Mid-South territory. We're going to have to do a Mid-South episode one of these days, just covering some of the great angles. Mid-South was almost like the forgotten big gem of a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
People kind of remember World Class thanks to the WWE's documentary on them a couple years ago, and it kind of reintroduced a lot of the newer fans. They've never quite done that for Mid-South yet. So that would be a good one to do. But
it's available on the network, though.
Yeah, the show is. Yeah, they've got Mid-South episodes on there. Bill Watts ran a good ship, a real tight ship for a long time.
What'd you say, George?
I said, yeah, he did. I was agreeing with Biff.
But it's just interesting how you track the Midnight Express. They kind of got put together almost by accident. And we're talking about the Eaton and Condrey version in '83. Now I was talking with LL after or before the show. The Midnight Express actually began life as a stable in Southeast Championship Wrestling, which was it's in the Tennessee, Alabama region, I think. It was out of Knoxville, maybe. It was like Continental before Continental. There was a big split in the 80s of the Tennessee territory, and it gets all confusing. But Dennis Condrey and Randy Rose and Norvell Austin were the original 3 in this faction. But this faction...
it was 1980 to 1983.
Right, and I mean, they had some regional success, but they were nothing compared to what the tag team would be, which is what we wanted to focus on. And it starts in '83 in Mid-South. Bill Watts and Jerry Jarrett. What had happened is Jerry Jarrett had too much talent, and Bill Watts needed talent. And so they traded Bobby Eaton, Dennis Condrey, and Jim Cornette. And I think they also traded the Rock and Roll Express as well.
And a player to be named later, and 2 future first-round draft picks.
Yeah, and a mansion in Malibu and cash considerations to Bill Watts. And Bill Watts, in return, gave them a green as goose. No, I'm sorry, not goose shit. Green as turtle shit is the expression. A green as turtle shit, Rick Rude, and Hacksaw Butch Reed, I think it was. So, you know, I mean, no offense to Rick Rude. He was great, but he wasn't very good in 1983.
Mm-mm.
The old joke was it was the only time Bill Watts ever lost the talent trade. So, or Jerry Jarrett lost the talent trade, I should say, because he gave up all of that talent for basically a
Jerry
sack of
Jarrett
nuts.
wasn't big on tag team wrestling because he had Lawler.
Well, he had Lawler and he had the Fabulous Ones.
And
so,
Memphis also had a lot of the weird Japanese import tag teams. Like you'd have Oneida and Masafuchi, you know, who'd come in for 6 months at a time and do tag team stuff against, you know, Eddie Gilbert and Ricky Morton. And Memphis was kind of its own universe in terms of how they booked their shows.
yeah, and Memphis, a lot of people today don't realize how odd Memphis was even in that era. There was a lot of people in Florida and the Carolinas especially that did not like the Memphis territory. They thought it was way too goofy and, you know, business exposing.
Exactly.
It was just so odd. But hey, you give credit where credit's due. They were one of the last territories standing.
Oh yeah, and they always drew until
yeah.
they didn't stop drawing until Raw and Nitro started on airing on Mondays, which was their big night at the Pyramid. So I think they were, or the Forum, excuse me. So they were they were drawn until the 90s.
Yeah, they would put 7,000 to 9,000 people in the Coliseum down there in Memphis every week for 30 something years.
Yeah.
So, and they also popularized the brawl in the stands, the famous concession stand brawl between Lawler, Dundee, and the Blonde Bombers, Larry Latham and Wayne Ferris, aka the Honky Tonk Man. That's what actually triggered Mr. Onita to go back to Japan and basically trigger some of those deathmatch style brawls because he saw the concession stand brawl and thought, hey, that's what tag team wrestling should be.
Yeah. One of the fun facts about Memphis is you may know this, Biff. Geto, the New Japan booker,
Yes,
grew up basically immersed in the Memphis territory. Like he cut his teeth in the late 80s working Memphis, and he still says that it is a huge influence to him booking New Japan today is the stuff he learned in Memphis under Jarrett and Lawler in the late 80s.
The only reason that I knew that, and it's funny you brought that up, the only reason I knew that is if you go back and watch the original copy of ECW's very first pay-per-view, the Michinoku Pro 6-man tag match, Joey Styles mentions how much influence that Dusty Rhodes and the Memphis style had on some of those guys. Dick Togo was one of them. He grew up, he was a huge Terry Funk fan. And it kind of opened up this whole world where a lot of those Japanese wrestlers loved Memphis, Mid-South, Crockett. They just absorbed that Southern style of wrestling for whatever reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
It caught on, but it caught on huge with them. So,
well said. Well said. I can't argue with you, so I won't, my friend.
well, I mean, look, I'm from North Carolina, okay, and I've also got family out in Oklahoma for obvious reasons. So, you know, I have an affinity for the Carolina style. I have an affinity for the Mid-South style. I am a big fan of World Class. I don't know as much about Continental or Gulf Coast as I do the others. I like championship wrestling from Florida, Georgia, okay?
Yeah, especially in the late 70s.
Yes. During those wrestling wars in Georgia, that was some primo stuff, you know? I'm not one of these old redneck homers. Yeah, me a redneck. That's funny. I'm not a redneck homer that says, well, it was better in the South. I'm not going to be that guy. But I will always defend the quality of Southern wrestling and Southern tag team wrestling in particular. I mean, if I started right now, I could end this show just listing off, a litany of tag teams that people may not remember today that were tremendous in their era. There's just so many. I mean, we were talking Memphis a minute ago. Tojo Yamamoto, another Japanese import. You talk about a guy that you would never expect in a million years to get over. Tojo Yamamoto was one of them.
Yeah.
How about Eddie Gilbert and Ricky Morton in Memphis?
Yes, Eddie Gilbert. Oh, Eddie Gilbert, so good. He was amazing. Another guy that was kind of under represented in the business, didn't get nearly enough credit. Everybody knows Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. What people don't know is that Robert Gibson's brother was also a really great wrestler in the 70s and 80s in Memphis. Ricky Gibson. He had a huge run as a tag team guy and as a singles guy in the Memphis area. So, of course, we could talk about the interns under Ken Ramey. In Texas, you had all of Skandal Akbar.
You mentioned something funny. You mentioned the interns. I think, what was it, LL? 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we were in Louisiana somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. And we were inside a truck stop eating dinner. And I think you and I were talking about wrestling, and it caught the attention of another driver.
He was a wrestler.
He used to be a wrestler. He was intern number 1. This guy, and I'm sorry, he could barely walk.
Yeah. Because
of the stuff he put his body through. And he went on and told stories about being on the road, and it was funny. It was funny. So you mentioned the interns. That just kind of that brought back a memory to me, because he's now driving. As far as I know, he's still driving. He could be retired now because that poor guy could barely move.
We were down. It was right after the one hurricane.
Where?
Trying to think where, because it was after the one hurricane. We were south of Baton Rouge, but not close to New Orleans. Oh shit! Forgot what town we were in. We were between Baton Rouge and New Orleans.
Oh, Hammond?
No.
I think it was a Petro we were at, but I don't remember.
It wasn't a Petro. It was a regular, it was like a mom and pop shop.
Yeah, but we talked to him for hours. I did anyway.
Yeah, we were down there, but it was a mom and pop shop.
He remembered. They were under Dr. Tom Pritchard, the interns.
Oh man, Dr. Tom, and that's another unsung hero of Southern wrestling in the late '80s. And Smoky Mountain. If you watch Smoky Mountain Wrestling, you know Tom Pritchard very well.
Yeah, Bruce's brother.
Yeah. Bruce and Tom, either one. Open mic if you ever want to come on. Open invitation, guys. But
yes, we met intern number 1, and he was big. He was what do you say, 6'9", 6'10", hun? Maybe about 325.
Yeah, I don't think he was that heavy. He lost a lot of weight.
He lost a lot of weight, but he still had the big arms and the big legs.
Yeah.
You could see it. It was just like, ugh. But the guy was so broken up. You could look at his hands and see he had broken fingers several times. They were all twisted and arthritis up, and he said he had 2 knee replacements and a hip replacement, and he was 47 years old. Or no, he was 57 years old. At 57, he's had 2 knees replaced and a hip replaced.
The road will own you, gentlemen and ladies.
Yes, it will. It's just crazy.
I gotta ask you, Biff. What's your favorite version of the Midnight Express? If you could pick a combination and a year what would it be?
Well, obviously, Bodacious Bart and Bombastic Bob.
Oh, I'm
Just,
other than them, of course.
Other than them, of course. You know what? I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm going to throw a curveball at you because this is a year that people would not expect Midnight Express Homer to say. It was their last year, 1990. Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton in 1990 would be my favorite year. And
When they were in the NWA?
Yeah, it was because what happened was, and we can talk about this here in a minute, Jim Cornette and Stan Lane wound up leaving WCW under Jim Herd after Halloween Havoc 1990. And that's why the Midnight Express wound up breaking up. Jim Cornette and Stan Lane went and worked Smoky Mountain, which was Jim Cornette's territory. And that was shortly after that was when Stan Lane and Tom Pritchard formed the first incarnation in Smoky Mountain of the Heavenly Bodies. And then Stan wound up retiring, and Jimmy Del Rey replaced him. And so that's Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey are kind of known as the Heavenly Bodies in Smoky Mountain. Stan Lane was the first member in that incarnation. But yeah, if you look at what they did in 1990, and now I was going to bring this up also here in a second. The tag team scene in WCW in 1990 is one of the quiet, all-time great tag team scenes, because look at who you've got running around here. You've still got the Skyscrapers with Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey, and then you've got Mark Callis comes in, a.k.a. Undertaker. He works with Dan Spivey for a little while in 90. You still got the Fabulous Freebirds kicking around. You've got Doom with Ron Simmons and Butch Reed under Theodore R. Long.
They were fun group of hosses.
So great. And
they were
watching them beat the crap out of some jobbers. That's like some of my first wrestling memories watching WCW in like 1990. Just watching these big ass guys beat up jobbers always made me happy.
And and Doom is interesting in the fact that they had not one but two all-time great managers. They started out with Nancy Sullivan as woman, and oh my God, Nancy Sullivan in 1989. Holy shit! I'm sorry, but she gives me the vapors, and I mean she was great.
Biff, everybody gives you the vapors.
Yeah, but Nancy really gave me the vapors. She was so great. She was so great. The Robin Green angle on Rick Steiner. Oh, and the Steiner brothers. You got to throw them out there in 90. They were,
Yep.
They were good.
World beaters.
They were good.
They were good together.
Speaking of guys,
you can't forget the team of Flying Bryman and Tom Sink either.
Oh, Brian and Z-Man, yeah.
Brian and Z-Man.
And the Southern Boys, also known as the Young Pistols. They were a pretty decent Southern tag team.
Yep.
George, you were going to ask a question.
What was I going to say? I don't even remember. Oh, so I was going to say, speaking of tag teams that like to beat the crap out of jobbers, you had the Steiner brothers.
Well, so did the Road Warriors in the very beginning.
Yeah,
too.
they were stiff as hell, the Steiner brothers.
Yeah.
Road Warriors were pretty stiff too.
Yeah, that was an NWA hallmark.
Yes.
Listen to this Murderers Row. You had the Road Warriors, you had Dr. Death Steve Williams and Mike Rotunda as part of the Varsity Club.
Oh God! Under Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster.
Oh yeah, and you had Gordy Roberts and Hayes as the Freebirds in '87, and then you had Gordy Roberts and Garvin in '89. The Samoan SWAT team in '89. You had, of course, we can't forget Ole and Arn, the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. I mean, you talk about beat the piss out of you. There you go. It was a staple. The original Powers of Pain, Barbarian and Warlord were in the NWA in '87, and Manny Fernandez was another tough one.
Every one of these people you're mentioning was worked stiff.
Yeah, and that's why the Fantastics and the Rock and Roll Express, that's why they got so freaking popular, because the NWA had two types of teams. There were the pretty boy teams that all the women loved. You know, they used to say Ricky Morton had more sex on the way to the ring than most people had in a year. Okay? I mean, you had the Fantastics, And then you had the monster heel teams that beat the crap out of them. And some
everybody
of them,
got over.
And everybody got over. Oh my God, guys! If you never saw it, if you didn't live through it, it was amazing. Go on YouTube and listen to those crowd reactions. You would think the freaking Beatles were coming to the ring.
Yes, and this is
Rock and Roll Express would come out. It's ridiculous.
And here's the thing: this is television studio matches, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And the thing is
maybe 50 people, 100 people.
You're looking at an era where the tag teams meant something. They were the best. Tag team matches were better to watch than singles matches.
Oh yeah, easily. I mean, if you just look at what the Midnight Express did in 1988, they had probably the best 9-minute tag team match in the history of wrestling at the first Clash. Featuring the Fantastics again. I know that was a shout out to George. I know he's a Fantastics mark. Like I'm a Midnight mark.
I think Tommy Rogers is one of the most underrated wrestlers of the past 40 years.
Yeah, I'll co-sign with you on that. The match at Greensboro at the first Clash. I mean, that was a Memphis style brawl for a Greensboro crowd that had never saw it. And I mean, you talk about the crowd just igniting. That match lasted 9 minutes, and it was like ranked the second best match of the year. Okay, so I mean, that was just the kind of quality they had. They went from the Fantastics, then they wrestled the Road Warriors some in '88. They actually helped turn the Road Warriors heel in 1988, which actually turned them babyface. They wrestled Arn and Tully after the Great American Bash. That's where they won the titles in Philadelphia, their last world title. And then they feuded with the original Midnight Express after that. So that's 4 legendary tag teams.
The original Midnight Express managed by who?
Well, that would be Mr. Paulie Dangerously, of course.
You know, you mentioned this match. I saw it about a year ago. The Midnight Express versus the Fantastics at the first Clash of the Champion.
Yeah.
That's just a joy. It's 10 minutes long. It's nonstop. There's no BS, no filler, all killer. It's just everything you want in a good, fast tag team match.
Yeah, it was tremendous. I mean, that whole Clash show deserves to be in the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it is
a great 2 hours of wrestling. So.
Some of Dusty's finest bookings there.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny because '88 was not a good year business-wise up until the Bash that year. But my God, that first Clash show, just the talent roster alone.
Yep.
And that's an understated part of the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette's greatness. When you consider how many legendary acts there were on that roster between 85 and 89 and 90, to stand out in the crowd amongst that group of peers, you know you're doing something right.
But yeah, like I said, look at that era. Between 1980 and 1990 was the best time for tag teams.
It was.
We could do an entire show just listing off all the great tag teams from the WWF, the AWA, and the NWA.
From all the territories between the 80s and the 90s.
Oh,
I mean, you look at it. You have so many good ones coming out, and they were popular. Everybody wanted to see the tag team matches.
Well, you know, let's talk about tag teams from the 80s and 90s. You know, there's one team that you can't forget, the Wild Samoans.
Oh, yeah.
Patriarchs.
Offensica.
Yep.
Offensica, the patriarchs of the Anawa'i family.
And they lost their last tag titles to a great team in its own right, Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas.
Yes.
Had a great tag team. They lost to another great tag team, Dick Murdoch and Adrian Adonis. That's why they lost it to the Bulldogs, and they lost it to
the Hart Foundation.
Yeah, well, you got to throw the Dream Team in there at some point. Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, maybe not so good, but The Hart Foundation, the British Bulldogs, one of my all-time favorite tag teams, Demolition.
But you look at what the ones you're naming. It's between the 80s and the 90s. You got all these great tag teams.
Well, it's because tag team wrestling mattered back then.
That's why, George, I agree with you with what you said last Thursday night on your show about putting all the tag teams on SmackDown and putting all the women on Raw.
Yeah, I would. That way, you really emphasize the difference between the two shows, and you would really
and one of the reasons I agree with you putting all the tag teams over on SmackDown is because who books over there, right? Who's doing some of the booking over there right now? Road Dogg. What is he? What was he? Tag team specialist.
Yeah.
But the thing is you got to remember, if they do what the rumor states at Evolution, they're talking about women. One of the rumors is a women's tag teams.
They need to put them all on one show, though. There's just not enough women to do a tag team division.
Yeah, unless they float between brands, which to me, floating titles is the beginning of the end of the brand split. That's what killed it originally. So.
Exactly.
I don't think they should have had a brand split to begin with.
Oh yeah. I want to ask y'all a question, and
sure.
this is leading to a point that ties into the larger point that we were talking about. George, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to get Taker and LL to confirm or add a drop. If you had to pick 5 wrestlers that represented the WWF in the 1990s, like the totality of the decade, like, you know, you had guys like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage that were wrestling into the early 90s, but if you talk about the 5 wrestlers who were the face of the WWF for the decade of the 90s, who would your 5 guys be? And I think I know who they're going to be, and it's going to tie into the point I'm trying to make. So who's your 5?
You ready? You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Shawn, Brett, Rock, Austin, Taker.
TM, LL, do y'all agree with those 5?
100%. It's the same 5 I had.
Okay. LL, do you concur with that list?
Yeah.
What do 4 of those 5 have in common with one another?
They started as tag team guys.
They either started as tag teams or they got big as tag team guys. Undertaker started as a tag team wrestler.
Yep.
Austin started as a tag team wrestler, and he made his biggest mark with
Hollywood Blondes.
Hollywood Blondes. Yep. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. They were tag team specialists.
Don't sleep on The Rock either in lumping him into this comparison. He was dead in the water until he joined the Nation of Domination.
That's right. That's exactly right.
You know, and you know, you can continue this throughout 40 years of WWF history, that the #1 guy starts as a tag team guy, and then he branches off and becomes the guy. Like name someone who's been at the top of the card in the past 40 years. They've been in a tag team.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that for any company. I mean, Ric Flair, he started as a tag team guy. Dusty Rhodes.
Everybody is diverse as
Dusty Rhodes was a tag team. Was a tag team with Dirty Dick Murdoch.
To the Shield Boys. We talked about Ray Stevens. We talked about Nick Bockwinkel. All tag team guys.
But you look at Triple H, he wasn't. He tagged with people, but he wasn't an actual started out as
Triple H should not become Triple H should not even become Triple H till DX when it was him and Shawn Michaels, though.
You know what? I gotta concur. It really was that pairing with Shawn. Now, whether you consider it I don't know if you would consider it a faction or a tag team necessarily, because you know it was kind of a faction, but it's kind of a tag team. So,
well, he was doing a lot on his own and getting up there, but what really made him was DX.
Yeah. And Triple H will tell you that because they kept trying to get him, Shawn and him wanted to work together, and Vince kept telling them no.
Because Hunter Hearst Helmsley did not get anywhere really.
No, the Hunter Hearst Helmsley character was not working.
Yeah, the larger point is you go back and look at any major top guy. And it's almost without fail, any top guy in the business for any length of time was a part of a tag team at some point. Whether it's, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, Hulk Hogan was in a tag team for a while. Randy Savage was in a tag team.
Yeah, Randy Savage was in a tag team with his brother, Leap and Lanny, and had their father, Angelo, as their manager.
Yeah. So,
in WWA in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But you also look at it. Hulk Hogan and Ryan D together. He had the Mega Powers.
Yeah, with Randy.
Yeah, I mean, Hulk Hogan would form those super teams a lot. He even into the 2000s when he formed one with Edge, but Hogan was wrestling as a tag team with Ed Leslie in the 70s.
Yep.
You brought up Edge. Look at it, Edge and Christian.
Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys.
Yep.
They had Bully Ray and TNA. He was with the Dudley Boys, and we
talked about them before. Gargano and Ciampa.
There you go. Yeah.
It goes on and on.
It's
good singles wrestlers start out as tag team wrestlers, and I don't understand. It never made sense to me. It still don't. But hey, whatever. If the formula works, stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What part did you not get? The why tag team spin out singles? You mean?
No. Yeah. How come the good wrestlers like they got had to be tag teams to really get anywhere?
Well, part of that is by design. Like part of that is the actual purpose. Like Steve Austin was put into stables and tag teams in WCW because they thought he was going to be their top heel.
And he didn't do very good till he got off on his own.
Well, I mean,
Stone Cold.
I mean, he was good in
WCW.
He just reached another level in WWF. So,
because if you listen,
don't sleep on the Hollywood Blondes either.
No, they were good.
They were amazing.
No, I'm not saying they were good, but if you listen to Steve Austin himself, when he was in the tag teams, he goes, "It's like he wasn't going anywhere."
Well, when Steve Austin first got involved with the tag team with what was his name? I can't even think. Brian
Pillman.
Was it Brian Pillman? Yes, yeah. Brian Pillman. He was in WCW. He didn't want to be in tag team. He wanted to be a single wrestler. He wanted to be a heel.
And what did he?
And Dusty forced him into this tag team with Brian Pillman. Then out of it, they got it over. They got the tag team over. They were hot. They were this and that. And then they wanted to break it up. And then Steve Austin was breaking up the tag team because he was in a good act.
WCW going to WCW.
Right.
Shocks.
It's basically attitudes too.
Have y'all ever heard the story of the Horseman unit that never was in 1990?
Do tell.
Which one is
this? This was a proposed Horseman lineup in 1990 because when Arn Anderson came back to WCW in late 1989, he was supposed to come back with Tully Blanchard, and Tully failed a drug test on the way out of WWF, and that wound up getting him essentially blackballed from WCW under Jim Herd. So when Arn and Tully were supposed to come back and reform the Horsemen with Ric Flair and Sting, now you don't have Tully, so they had to bring in Ole, who kind of became like a manager type figure. And then they wound up going through a couple of different lineups in 90 with Barry Windham and Sid Vicious, but it never really clicked. The original plan that was orchestrated by Jim Cornette and Ric Flair was to have Woman, who was Nancy Sullivan, who was managing Ric Flair at the time. She was going to buy the contract of Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. She was going to buy the Midnight Express from Jim Cornette.
That's right. I heard about this.
Jim Cornette would have transitioned to an announcer role, and then the Four Horsemen in 1990 would have been Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, and Stan Lane. Now take a moment.
That's a hell of a group.
And imagine
That's money that they left on the table.
Imagine what that 4 horseman unit could have done against the Steiners, against Sting and Lex Luger. Imagine the Midnight Express versus Sting and Lex Luger in Super Brawl 1. Okay?
No. Like I said, let's not speculate because they left too much money on the table.
Yeah, that's what we could have had in 90, 91, and 92. And imagine, you want to talk about some real dream fantasy booking? Imagine if that horseman unit takes off and Cornette and Lane stick around in WCW for a few years and you get a babyface 4 horseman unit taking on the Dangerous Alliance. Sweet baby Jesus.
George, George, are you awake? Have you?
I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay. I thought maybe you passed out.
I'm just thinking about how great that would have been.
Yeah.
It makes you. It gives you a funny feeling in your special place, don't it?
Yeah. What's the phrase you like? You get the vapors.
I got the vapors.
Yeah, I get the vapors.
But like I said, look at the amount of money that was left on the table with that.
Yeah, but you know what? That just goes to show you, and we're talking nostalgically about fantasy booking that never happened, but we talk about it with such reverence because that's how great this team was. Like, one of the things I want to do before we go off the air here in the next 20 minutes or so, because we're about 20 minutes from being over here tonight.
Yep.
I want to just kind of give a list of some of the great matches that you can go and find either on YouTube or the WWE Network, just to kind of sample the Midnight Express. Because if
the top one, Biff, the very top one you got to find, and there's several of them, is Midnight Express versus Rock and Roll Express. Beautiful Bobby and Stan Lane versus Ricky Morton and oh dang it,
Robert Gibson.
Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton.
I don't know. I am partial. I'm staring at this Clash of the Champions, Midnight Express versus the Fantastics, and I swore to Christ, as soon as we're off the air, I'm going to watch this bad boy.
Would you guys believe I never heard of the Fantastics?
You've never heard of the Fantastics?
Nope.
Remember AWA Shrouded Kid here?
Yeah, they were a Southern tag team. They were a group of Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers. And I said earlier that Rogers is one of the most underrated workers of the past 30, 40 years. He was a technical worker who, when it came to believable and athletic offense and believable selling, was the guy. I thought he was just tremendous.
Yep.
They were kind of like the Fantastic ones, the top hats and and music videos and during that era. But Tommy Rogers was really something special in my view.
You know who Tommy Rogers reminded me of, and this is going to sound like such a weird pairing, but if you hear it, I think you might agree. Imagine if you put Rick Martel and Kurt Hennig together. It's like a laboratory. And you meshed them together, and you threw in a touch of Gino Hernandez in the looks, maybe. That triple combination, that's Tommy Rogers.
Yep. I can think it. I can see that.
The problem with the Fantastics is that once the territories died, they were too small to make in the Federation. So they kind of withered on the vine once the territories went away.
Yeah, and another problem that they faced, and this was kind of going back to what we were talking about a little earlier when it was the Rock and Rolls with the Fantastics. The Rock and Roll Express and the Fantastics were both the same class of tag team in the sense that they were drawing on the fans' desire to not see them get beat up. Now, the Fantastics were by Jim Cornette's own admission, the Fantastics were a better overall tag team.
Right.
Than the Rockers. They could do more stuff with the Fantastics, but in the general sense of the word, the Fantastics and the Rock and Roll Express were drawing the same type of reaction. And so the problem for the Fantastics is whenever they went into a territory that the Rock and Roll Express had already been in, they came across like a copy almost of the Rock and Roll Express. Even though they were a distinct tag team and they had a different aesthetic about them, they didn't get over as big where the Rock and Roll Express had gone in first. So when they went into Mid-South and they went into the Carolinas, They got over, but they weren't Rock and Roll Express over. But by that same token, wherever the Fantastics went first and the Rock and Roll Express followed them, the Rock and Roll Express were viewed as the imitators. And so the Fantastics got to Dallas first. And that was probably their biggest territory. The Rock and Roll Express never really drew much in Dallas because the Fantastics had kind of homesteaded that territory first, and so they never really got over.
Well, the Fantastics were big in Memphis, too.
But the Rock and Roll Express had the Mid-South.
Well, yeah, but you know who you can thank for that?
Crockett.
Yeah,
the problem with Rogers, and this is no fault of his own, obviously, is that he was, even by the standards of the baby faces of his days, he was little. He was like 5'9", maybe. I mean, jacked. He was big. I mean, he was shredded, but he was just not a large person. But he made up for it by being a super athlete.
He was a super athlete before Rusev was a super athlete.
Yeah, and Bobby Fulton was the talker of the two of them.
Yeah, and Tommy Rogers, the thing with Tommy Rogers was probably the hardest working wrestler in the business because Tommy Rogers had to develop the kind of body and ability that comes naturally to some people. It didn't come naturally to him. He actually achieved his look and his, agility in the ring through just sheer determination and willpower. Like, he had to work that much harder than everybody else, but that just goes to show you what dedication to the business he had, considering how good he actually was. It was just an astounding, run that the Fantastics had. It's a shame they're not as recognized as much as they should be, because they were every bit the equal of the Rock and Roll Express.
Absolutely.
And maybe we're even a little better. That rivalry with the Midnight Express, you can find it at the First Clash of the Champions and also the rematch at the 1988 Great American Bash pay-per-view in Baltimore. The Midnight Express wrestled the Fantastics on that card as well. That's another crackerjack match to go find.
I'll check. I've seen the Clash one. I'll have to check out the Great American Bash one for sure. Yeah,
the Clash match was kind of the crazy throw tables around and brawl everywhere, and then the Clash or the Great American Bash match was more of the classic tag style.
Okay. So they're both good in their own ways, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like, would you like $1 million in cash or $1 million just deposited into your bank account?
I see. Okay. Well, it looks like I got my marching orders when we're done here.
I mean, now if you're looking, I
will need a match of the week for Thursday's show, so I'm pretty sure one of these is going to be it.
You're welcome. You're welcome ahead of time.
But there's something else, Biff, with the Rock and Roll Express. What helped them get over? Jim Cornette also helped get them over.
Yeah, he did.
Yes. Oh yeah, you can't. There is no Rock and Roll Express without the Midnight Express, and that's where I was going with the Mid-South territory. When the Rock and Roll Express came in, they were probably number 3 in the pecking order because Bill Watts and Stagger Lee, which was the Junkyard Dog under a mask, were doing the big run with the Midnights when they came down from Memphis into Mid-South in 83 and 84. They had that huge match. I think was it in Tulsa? It wasn't the last Tango in Tulsa, or the last Stampede or something. But they had a huge match, the Midnights versus Bill Watts and Stagger Lee, a.k.a. Junkyard Dog. And that stemmed from the famous angle on Mid-South Television where Jim Cornette got his face shoved into a cake by the Rock and Roll Express after they won the Mid-South tag titles. And that's what triggered Bill Watts to come over and slap the crap out of Cornette.
That was a beautiful slap.
He did. It was a Mr. Perfect Mr. Perfect level of sell job on that slap. He got like a backflip.
But yeah, so that you think about it for the Rock and Roll Express, Jim Cornette really helped get them over.
Yeah, the Rock and Roll Express took off thanks to Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express. Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express made a living out of beating the piss out of Ricky Morton. To this day, you ever hear people smart to the business talk about selling like Ricky Morton or playing Ricky Morton?
Yep.
It comes from Ricky Morton selling in tag team matches and generally against the Midnight Express.
And you think about it, when the Rock and Roll Express was inducted, Jim Cornette inducted them.
Yeah.
And you hear what Jim Cornette had to say. He said nobody could sell like Ricky Morton.
Yeah. I mean, that's Ricky Morton his career is almost entirely thanks to the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette.
Yep.
And what a hell of a career it was.
And he is smart enough to realize that too.
Oh, he'll admit it. Yeah, he'll admit it.
Both of them admit it.
No.
Gibson and Morton both admit that their careers would not be anywhere what they were if it were not for Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express.
I think that's a pretty fitting legacy.
But they don't say the Midnight Express so much. They say Jim Cornette.
Yeah.
Is what they say. But you figure, what was Jim Cornette? He was a mouthpiece for the Midnight Express.
He was a mouthpiece of the Midnight Express, and he was a heel manager.
He was their antagonist.
Yep.
And
And the more you would badmouth the Rock and Roll Express, the more the fans would get behind them. And that's exactly what a heel manager's job is.
It's exactly what any manager's job is, to get heat for their clients.
Yep. Oh, and let's not gloss over what Jim Cornette. I mean, we've talked about the Midnight Express and some of their great matches. We could list matches for days. You go find any Midnight Express match from about 84 to 90, and it's going to be pretty good. But we can't understate what Jim Cornette put his body through.
We're going to have to do one whole show on Jim Cornette.
Yeah, and if for no other reason than for the spot that we're about to talk about.
My favorite is
the scaffold match with Big Bubba missed.
Yeah. In an era before Mick Foley took a dive off the top of the cell, this was the all-time great ick spot, I call it. ICK. Ick.
When Jim Cornette fell off the scaffold.
When Jim Cornette fell off the scaffold. If you've never seen Starrcade 86, it's on the network. The match itself is the Midnight Express against the Road Warriors. I can't really recommend the match from a technical perspective. It is definitely a spectacle watching them crawl around on a giant scaffold 15 feet in the air.
The only thing that I liked it, but I cringed when Jim Cornette fell because he kept his legs straight.
Yeah, he blew both his knees out when he landed.
Because he fell straight down.
Yeah, and he gave himself a knock on the back of the head because he hit Bubba Rogers' knee. Bubba Rogers is Big Boss Man, by the way.
Yeah.
If you heard us talk about Big Bubba Rogers, maybe if you've never seen this era, that's who Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor, portrayed in the NWA before he came to the WWF in '88. So,
because you look at Jim Cornette's fall. If he would have bent his knees, fell a different way, he would have been okay, but he fell straight.
Well, Big Bubba was supposed to catch him, but he misjudged the distance because his sunglasses were too dark, and Ray Traylor admitted that.
Yeah.
He said he couldn't see.
Yeah.
Because Jim Cornette fell straight down feet first, landed on his feet, and that is painful.
Yeah, he had to have double knee surgery after that, folks.
Well, he injured the one knee he injured the worst was he injured one knee worse than the other, because the other knee he actually injured a few years later, right before the Great American Bash, when he wrestled Paulie Dangerously, aka Paul Heyman, in a tuxedo match. And that was, as far as tuxedo matches go, it was the Steamboat Flair of tuxedo matches, which ain't saying much, but it was.
Yeah, but still, hey, if you're gonna be a match, be the best match.
Damn right, and that's what they wanted to do. They wanted that match to be taken seriously.
What match was that where Jim Cornette got depantsed?
It was in Mid-South. He got put in a diaper or a dress. I think it was a dress.
Well, once he got depantsed, and he ends up walking around with boxer shorts with hearts on it.
Yeah, I know what. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was.
Somebody just yanked his pants down on him.
That strikes me as something either the Fantastics or the Rock and Roll Express would do. Now that I think about it, the Fantastics and the Midnight Express, they would just go wild. There was a clip on World Championship Wrestling. This is obviously available in one of the episodes in '88, I guess, where Jim Cornette just starts throwing chairs at the Fantastics from off camera. Like they just brawl through the whole set and tear the set down when they were at the old Techwood Studios in Atlanta. So that just reminds me of some of the crazy brawls they used to have with the Fantastics. And then, it's unfortunate that not much of it survives on tape, but Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson versus the Midnight Express. There's a few of their matches on YouTube that you could find taped from house shows on 8mm cameras or whatever. But those are excellent. The original Midnight Express, the original angle when they came out, poor Jim Cornette nearly got the NWA kicked off of TBS for his blade job. He got hit in the head with Paulie Dangerously by a cell phone. And when I say a cell phone, I'm talking about one of those old late 80s brick phones like Zach Morris used to carry on Saved by the Bell. Clocked him in the head, he bladed, and then he didn't see or feel anything at first.
So he did it again.
And what he didn't realize, and he's mentioned this on shoot interviews, is that because the studio was cold, it took a little bit for the blood to get going. So when he gigged himself twice, he gets thrown into the ring, and all of a sudden, it's like a 5-alarm Mexican blade job. Dusty Rhodes got it. Yeah, it's like Dusty Rhodes saw him backstage, and he's like, "Kid, I said get a little blood." It's like Dusty Rhodes, the king of blading here, is upset because he got too much juice. So,
That's funny. That because of a ribs in that, where Jim Cornette's pants were set on fire.
Yeah, I mean, there was Jim Cornette lifted fire from. I think Jerry Lawler taught him about it. I think that's who he said. Kind of gave him. I'm gonna get it out of the way. And then he kind of used that over the years. And of course, we talked about the Ronnie Garvin angle where he threw a fireball in Ronnie Garvin's face. They actually main evented the Charlotte Coliseum with that match and drew like 10,000 people. So that's how many people wanted to see Cornette die. But there's just so many memories you could go back and look. Jim Cornette is arguably the second or third greatest manager of all time. Him and Paul Heyman are kind of neck and neck for the number 2 spot.
Who's your number 1?
Bobby Heenan. That's
valid.
Yeah, I mean, Bobby, I mean, it's
just like longevity.
Well, yeah. I mean, Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman and Paul Bearer, and I'm trying to think of who else has talked about him before. All the wrestlers, Gene Okerlund. If they all say Bobby Heenan is number 1, who the hell am I to argue with that?
That's a valid point, my friend.
It's
then you had Paul Ellering.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole list of great managers.
I think the list starts with Heenan and then follows after him, though. I think you're right.
Yeah, it's Cornette.
I put Cornette over Paul Heyman.
Yeah. If we're talking managers right now, greatest managers, yeah. Heenan was the prototype. Cornette will tell you that Bobby Heenan was his hero.
Yeah. Yeah, I have no problem. I mean, wrestling as a fandom is subjective anyway, so I don't have any problem if somebody likes who they like. So some people that'll say Gary Hart was the best, or J.J. Dillon, or Captain Lou, and Freddie Blassie. You know, it's all subjective. But I mean that's that group you just mentioned. That's a who's who. I mean, Captain Lou, great guy, great heel manager, great face manager when the Samoans turn face. Freddie Blassie, pencil neck geek, loved him. Gary Hart, the silent, calm talking. If you want to talk about someone who spoke softly, carried a big stick, that was Gary Hart. Yeah. He very seldom ever raised his voice. There's a ton of legendary managers, and so it's a lost art. You know, I wish Jim Cornette could, you know, maybe teach a class and create a few managers. There's a couple of people wrestling right now in WWE that really should be managers. Alexa Bliss, looking at you. That's just, it's a lost art, and it's hard for people that weren't around or don't have experience with classic wrestling to know how valuable the manager used to be. You know, that's why to this day it's Jim Cornette, the Midnight Express. It's not just the Midnight Express. It's always Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, and there's a reason for that. He got paid just as much as the guys wrestling the matches because Jim Cornette is the one that was responsible for putting an ass every 18 inches. He had to talk them into the building, and then the Midnight Express sent them home happy or angry, depending on how badly beat up Ricky Morton.
Right.
So, but it's just a bygone era. It's an era when tag team wrestling was, you know, a huge draw, a huge part of the product, and it was treated with reverence and seriousness because it was serious business.
There's another manager, you know, we have to look at Jimmy Hart.
Oh man. And the megaphone.
Yep.
Here's a guy that got a portable loudspeaker over.
You think about it. You got Jim Cornette with the tennis racket, Polly Dangerously with the cell phone,
Paul Bearer with the urn,
and Jimmy Hart with the megaphone.
Yep. So, I mean, it's a great era. It's something that we all love. You know, we could talk about it for hours. Unfortunately, we're going to wrap up here in just a second. But we have so much more that we could talk about, and I'm sure we'll get back to them in another episode down the line.
Of course.
Okay, I got a question for you, Biff.
Okay.
Now, out of the tag team for the Midnight Express, which was better, Bobby Eaton, Stan Lane, or Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey?
Are you asking who my favorite was or who the best was?
Who you think the best was?
Okay. This is a difficult question because they are two drastically different tag teams.
Yeah.
Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane would be considered the more modern style of tag team wrestling. They kind of popularized some of the high-flying moves. They were a little bit more athletic. If you've never seen Stan Lane, basically imagine an 80s yuppie that could get any woman he wanted. If you've never seen Dennis Condrey, who was the first partner of Bobby Eaton, imagine like a tobacco farmer from Missouri. Okay. So we're talking two dramatically different styles.
No, Dennis is the one that used to wear the scarf all the time.
Yeah, Dennis looked like he had drunk a 6-pack of beer before he went out to the ring every night.
Right.
See, that's the one. That's the tag team that I remember seeing a lot. Was Dennis Condrey and Bobby.
Well, Dennis and Bobby were a classic Southern tag team. Now, Bobby Eaton was always a great worker and an incredible worker for his era. Even Ric Flair used to say Bobby Eaton was a better worker than him, to show you how much of a compliment that is. But Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton were a classic Southern beat-em-up tag team that just so happened to be great wrestlers. Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton were not so much a Southern-style tag team, although they could do that, because Stan Lane had experience in tag teams with Steve Keirn as the Fabulous Ones. But they were kind of the polished, the snazzy, this is a tag team that could go to the WWF and Vince could get them over on national audience or whatever. In terms of who was the best, it really depends on the style you prefer. If you love that classic Mid-South style beat 'em up, those brawls, those ass-kicking contests, you're probably going to gravitate towards Bobby and Dennis. If you prefer more of the fast-paced, famous matches with the Fantastics or the Rock and Roll Express or the Southern Boys and the Steiners, you're going to go Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton. I personally think I like Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton more than Dennis and Bobby Eaton. And I think that's partly because I saw more of Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton than I did Dennis and Bobby. And so I'm going to say that Stan and Bobby were probably a hair better, but of the three main components of the Midnight Express, head and shoulders, unquestioned, Bobby Eaton was the best worker out of all three, and it's not even close. So I'll take Bobby and Stan by a hair over Bobby and Dennis, but if I had to choose just one member to see forevermore, it'd be Bobby Eaton. So.
Fair enough.
Well, you know what? We called this the lost episode on Jim Cornette, The Midnight Express. It kind of turned into Jim Cornette, The Midnight Express, and everything else we could think of. But that's what I love about this show. It's
we one of the things, like we've always said, is that we take the past wrestling and compare it to today.
Yeah,
to show people some of the differences of what they do now, while it was already done back in this time by so and so.
Well, you know why we can do this though? It's because we love classic wrestling. We talk about it. You can hear in my voice. I'm not going to hide it. I was excited, and I was a windbag today because I was excited. I love this subject. It excites me. It gives me
The
fond
vapors.
nostalgia. It gives me, yes, but I mean, I'm sorry. Look at Stan Lane, and everybody gets the vapors. Okay, I mean, the dude used to go out with Vanna White, so. But there's nostalgia. There is the recognition of the greatness of the acts that they worked with and who they were. And look, Jim Cornette and I politically are probably as far apart on the spectrum as you could get, and we differ opinion-wise on a ton of stuff. But if I could just pick that guy's brain for an hour about some of his stories, that guy could probably tell you a million awesome stories from just a great era of pro wrestling. And that's why we do the Connoisseurs of Wrestling, because we love it. And we want to share that love and that passion for wrestling with newer fans that didn't get a chance to experience what we all saw, and sometimes what we may take for granted. Considering how god-awful Raw has been lately, it's like, come back Mid-South, come back Mid-Atlantic.
That is a great way of putting it. I never wanted to be the wrestling fan who was like, oh, you're not a real wrestling fan because you don't remember when, just like I never wanted to be the hockey fan or the soccer fan or the music fan or the whatever fan who said that. I'd much rather be inclusive. So I think that's part of the reason why I think this show is so helpful.
For the record, I am one of those music fans. I'm a purist. If you weren't recording before 1995, you suck.
Unfortunately, I couldn't. So, but I recorded it in my brain. So, a lot of stuff is burned into my brain.
I'm just kidding. You don't suck. I just don't listen to you. So.
Fine.
Not you, Taker. I'm talking about other musicians, and I listen to you all the time.
Better, because if you don't behave in that thread tonight, the Van Hammer comes out.
I better shut this down before I get in trouble. I'm about to accidentally insulting one of my best friends on here. Okay, so let's take this.
I'm just being facetious as always.
Let's take this on home before I get into more trouble. As we wrap up, take care of some housekeeping notes here. Of course, tentatively we are still on for next week. Of course, you heard at the start of the broadcast. I, living in North Carolina, and currently watching Hurricane Florence and seeing what that storm is going to do. If we get the wrong track and it hits this area, then I will probably be without power for a few days, and so it might cause us to postpone next week's show or change the subject one. We'll talk about that. We'll keep you up to date.
Go buy a generator.
But do you know how expensive those things are?
Especially 3 days before landfall. I'm sure they're even more expensive.
Oh, yeah, you're going to have to drive 200 miles just to find one. So, but, Yeah, we're tentatively still on. I'm hoping that it's not very bad, although this is looking more and more like a Hugo type storm through Charlotte, unfortunately. So we'll see what happens. But if we are able to do next week's show, I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag now, because we're going to be setting up a very special show next week. You've probably heard rumors about it. It's going to be fantasy draft warfare. What it is we're basically doing a fantasy football style draft of our dream wrestling promotions. Any wrestler from any era is available to draft, and the four of us will basically draft our dream promotions.
Our core group.
Our core group. It'd be 7 rounds, so we're not going to have like a 50-round draft that lasts 5 hours or anything, but we're drafting our promotions, and then we're going to give you the opportunity to vote on which person had the best draft. Just a fun little episode, kind of taking advantage of the football season, which is in full swing now. God bless you, Alabama Crimson Tide, for doing your thing, and also kudos to the Carolina Panthers for destroying Dallas defensively.
Yes.
Yesterday. You're welcome, LL.
Watching the Bears choke when they had Green Bay down 20-0, was it, George?
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk
I
about
told you that at the start of the show. Why did you bring that up?
Although there's one positive out of that whole thing.
There's no positives out of that. You got skull-fucked by your rival on national television.
But Khalil Mack did something that hasn't been done since 1990. Hey, he showed he's worth the money. He went out there and performed. More than we could say for everybody else. Anyway.
I was just holding a moment of silence. It could have been worse. You could have been the Browns and blue balled your fans.
The Browns have a better record than the Bears do. Think of that.
The Cleveland Browns have now surpassed their record from 2016 or 2017, and they didn't even have to win to do it.
Best start since 2004.
I hope there's a way they go 0-16. That would be the best.
Adam Rice would drink himself into a stupor and never recover. So for Adam's sake,
if there is a way for them to tie every game, that would be unbelievable.
No, they can't tie every game. We play them this year. I'm not settling for a damn tie.
Okay.
We need every win we can get in the NFC South. Thank you very much.
I'm just glad Dallas lost.
Oh, they didn't just lose; they were mauled.
They were mauled.
They didn't get a first down until like halfway through the third quarter.
They had less than 100 total yards of offense at halftime.
Yeah, they didn't cross midfield until like the fourth quarter, right, or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't until like the fourth.
They were playing. They were being the LSU Tigers last night. In that championship game against Alabama.
Oh, yeah, I remember that ass kicking. That was great.
The 50-yard line. The one where they never crossed the 50-yard line.
Yeah, and when they did, they got knocked back to their own 35.
Yeah, Alabama won with like 4 field goals. LSU never scored, so that was back when Alabama had a kicker. Lord.
But with Tua Tagovailoa as the quarterback, do we need a kicker?
Well, that's the kind of the bright spot. You don't need a kicker when you're scoring touchdowns every drive. He's had like 10 drives this year, and 9 of them have ended in touchdowns. And the one that didn't ended in a fumble at one point. So, damn.
Yeah.
Tua, I love you. Marry me, dream man.
And you want to hear the scary part?
Oh, they're not even at peak yet. They're still learning to play.
He's not, and his brother is already in a pipeline to come to Alabama as a running back.
Alabama's best running backs and receivers are all freshmen and sophomores. You got at least another year, maybe 2, of this kind of greatness before the next crop comes in. So basically, NCAA, thanks for coming. Just go ahead and give us a national title now.
How do we get on football?
I love football. I'm so glad football's back, because now once this show is off the air, George is going to go watch Clash of the Champions and Great American Bash, and I'm watching Monday Night Football. I don't have to watch Raw.
I think the Rams are just going to maul Oakland, by the way, in the late game.
That would be Angel's luck.
I think the Rams are just going to just beat the piss out of them.
I'm hoping. I am an NFC. I watch the NFC carefully. I hope the Raiders pull it out, but I don't like their chances.
No, I think the Rams got 13-3 written all over them. I think that's a top to bottom.
I see them in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, they are very, very strong, top to bottom.
It's just going to be interesting to see what Jared Goff can do.
And they kept the main guy on defense they wanted to keep.
Yeah, they did.
Well, I mean, we'll have to wait and see, but we got a ways to go before we get to playoff time. Let's enjoy the start of the season. But as the start of the NFL season kicks off this weekend, we're ending this show here tonight. Hopefully, again, we'll be back next week. We got plugs that we always like to toss out there, of course. Cage Side Seats affiliated podcast. We got the Better Boys Club with Brent Brookhouse and Ethan Page. Not Your Demographic with Sunning Stella and Enigma Aaron. Keeping Up with Kayfabe, Mark Ridey, Jody May Esquire, and Jack King. And then we got Bros Before Elbows with Anthony Farron and Tommy. Unaffiliated podcast that we like to plug. Of course, Conrad Thompson and Bruce Pritchard, Something to Wrestle. Conrad and Tony Schiavone have What Happened When. Our good buddy Metal Matt, Full Metal's got his Ruthless Aggression podcast that drops Friday. Ringside Geeks for the Love of Wrestling with Miss Monroe and company. We got Match Fixing with Don Sal Cosmano on Cedar Bridge Media. Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling with William Fitzpatrick. Of course, the Violent Wrestling Podcast with Ambrose Alley and Prince Moxley Lopez. Also, Ambrose Alley has her show. Oh my God!
AA's Ramblings.
AA's Ramblings. Thank you. Yeah, I always forget that one. Awesome shows. Definitely check them out. Love me some AA and Mox. Of course, our own George Curtain Jerker at Savis. I don't know why.
Is this where I plug my show?
Yes.
You're doing such a great job.
I was about to plug it for you.
Go right ahead, my friend.
It's one of the shows that I love the most catching up with during the week. Two Guys, One Sport, Crazy Chris Colgan and George Curtain Joker at Savis, our own George Curtain Joker at Savis. I love the emphasis on your last name for some reason.
Hey, you know what? You say it better than 99% of people born in this country. So I will give you props for that, my friend.
They pronounce it at Saves or something?
Yeah, I get that a lot. Yeah, no good. You accent the right syllable, so I approve.
That's Panama heritage there. So
nice, nice.
Yeah, Two Guys, One Sport drops Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir. No, 9 Eastern, 8 Central.
Son of a biscuit. 8 Central, 9. Yes, I'm always on an East Coast bias, so I'm like ESPN of podcasters here. But be sure to check that out. Seriously, it's one of the best shows you're going to catch all week. And speaking of good shows, another one of my favorite shows, Taker's Minion and Mr. Doc Sinju, of course, bringing you the awesome sauce that is Shooting the Breeze Saturday mornings, 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Eastern on weekends of the Big Four. But hell, we're not going to have another Big Four show until Survivor Series. So make sure to be there on YouTube, 11 a.m. Eastern. That is your homework assignment. Two Guys, One Sport, and Shooting the Breeze. And we got one more to talk about. Yours truly is going to be tagging up with the Saskatchewan Spinning Nerve Hold, a.k.a. George Fivehold, a.k.a. my good buddy from the north. We have Grounds for Development, a brand new podcast dropping this Thursday morning, 10 a.m. It's a special look at NXT 205 Live, the WWE Performance Center. Basically, imagine college football game day meets NXT recap show. It's going to be great. We have a cool format for it. Sketch is, really excited about it. I'm really excited about it. We got a cool logo. We got a cool name. Thank you, Mr. Doc Sinju and Taker, for all of your input and help getting this show off the ground. Make sure to check in Thursday morning for that. You got all sorts of great wrestling content to listen to, guys. So you've got no excuse to be ignorant of anything going on in the world of wrestling, whether it's classic wrestling through the connoisseurs, whether it's me coming on and talking about having the vapors and saying orgasm on Shooting the Breeze, or whether I'm spamming the comment section during Two Guys, One Sport. You've got all the Biff you can handle. So what's not to like? I'm an asshole. I'm sorry.
You're
We
fine.
love you.
Is it inherent?
You are an asshole, but we do love you.
I get more asshole-ish when I get nervous, and I got to be honest, I'm nervous about this storm. I don't normally get nervous about hurricanes, but
You'll be fine.
This one just looks like ass. So,
You'll be fine.
You'll be fine, man.
you say that, and I'll, gonna be wading my way to the mailbox. So,
Well,
but that is the plug list. So be sure to check out all of those podcasts. Of course, we like to give personalized shout outs for all of our connoisseurs hosts. George, where can they find you during the week?
I'm on Twitter at Giatsavis, G-A-T-S-A-V as in Victor E-S. My show's Twitter is at 2 Guys 1 Sport, the number 2 and the number 1.
LL, where can they find you during the week?
Windstorm64 on Twitter. And of course, right here on Monday nights.
And TakersMinion Godfather, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me as always on Twitter at Takers_Minion. You can also contact my show on Saturdays at Shooting the Breeze 1. That's BREEZ 1. Someone took the actual name Shooting the Breeze. We'll be doing a mailbag show the first Saturday in October. So, tweet us on Twitter. That's both my co-host, Mr. Dr. Senju, and myself. With any questions you may have for us, we'll try to answer them. We're going to start doing that once a month or every week. It'll be like the last 20 minutes of each show. We'll open up the mailbag and start taking questions from you guys. But yeah, the first full show is going to be the first Saturday in October. So you got plenty of time to get some questions out. I'm hoping to get some good ones like what George and Chris had this past week on their show, that was a nice thing you did last week.
Y'all helped us out a lot.
That show was so amazing.
You guys, all our listeners came in the clutch, came in through in the clutch, helping us with the questions. So hopefully y'all can help TakersMinion just as much.
I hope you can help us out there, George. I'm sure you'll have one or two.
I'll think of something.
Oh, I'm sure I'll have some questions.
Okay.
You had good ones, my friend. You. It's almost like you're a connoisseur of wrestling.
Oh.
Man, that would be a great name for a wrestling podcast.
Yeah.
Damn, I think that's what this one's called.
We need T-shirts is what we need.
We need to talk to Doc Senju about getting that made up. Have you seen the perspective T-shirt logo artwork yet there, Biff?
Doc Senju is a freaking masterclass in awesome graphic design. So I look forward to seeing what he puts out.
Yeah, we've already got one possible T-shirt design in the works. It's done. I like it. So now it's just figuring out how to get it done and how much to, if we get an online store or not. That's the next step.
Well, on that note, that'll be the next. Hell no, it'll be the next show. We got Grounds for Development and 2 Guys 1 Sport coming Thursday morning and Thursday evening. Thursday is going to be fun for y'all, so y'all enjoy the shows on Thursday, and then make sure to be there Saturday as well, and then we'll hopefully be back next Monday for our big fantasy draft warfare episode. You can find me on the Twitter machine at Real Deal Biff. That's DILL like the pickle, because my original show was called The Pickle Barrel. I know I have no life. You can find all of our contact information written out in the doobly-doo down below, so be sure to drop us a line on the Twitter, and make sure to check out Twitter for a link to the Grounds for Development, our debut episode, and the channel itself will be coming up this Thursday. Looking forward to that. As always, I want to thank Legends Lover, TakersMinion, and George Adsavis. It's like I say it like Kaiser Soze.
I love it. I love it.
I want to thank George, TakersMinion, and LL for another fine episode. I am Biff Kensington, and this has been the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. Guys, have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the rest of the week's shows. If you live in the Carolinas, I'm praying right along with you. Florence, you bitch, stay away. This is Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express to the Connoisseurs of Wrestling. We'll catch you next week, guys. Y'all take care. Bye-bye now.
Bye, guys.
Right.
When the moon is in the... Oh, sorry.